Hello everyone, and welcome to the lecture on subquery. So we're going to learn how to use subqueries and that subquery syntax to perform really complex and really powerful queries. And the best way to show this is through some simple examples. So overall, a subquery allows us to use multiple select statements where we basically have a query within a query. And we're going to show this by a few examples. The first example is this. Suppose we want to find the films whose rental rate is higher than the average rental rate. One way we could do this is in two steps. We could find the average rental rate by using the select statement with the average function. And then after finding that average rental rate, we can use the result of the first query in the second select statement to find the films that we want. So let me go ahead and go to the SQL editor to code that out. And we're going to show how we could do that in two steps, and then later on we'll see how we can use a subquery to simplify the task. So first we're going to go the long way about it, and then we're going to show you how you can use a subquery to simplify it. So again, the task we're trying to solve is this first bullet point here. We want to find the films whose rental rate is higher than the average rental rate. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the SQL editor now. Okay, so here I am at the SQL editor. We're going to be working with the film table, because if we scroll to the right of the film table, notice here we have the rental rate. So again, we want to find the movies whose rental rate is higher than the average rental rate. One way to do this, given what you know right now, would be to do two distinct separate steps. It would be step one, find the average rental rate. So say something like AVG rental underscore rate column, get the average from film, then run that query. Notice that it's $2.98. And then once we have that result, $2.98, then we would continue with the rest of the query. We'd say select, for instance, title and rental rate from the film table where rental underscore rate is greater than $2.98, which we discovered from our first query. And if I run that, here I have all the movies whose rental rate is greater than the average $2.98. That's basically $2.99 and above. So that was a little inconvenient because I had to use two queries. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back real quick to the PowerPoint slides. And again, to comment, here we are at the slides, to comment back on what we just saw, the code we just went through isn't so elegant. It requires two steps, and what's really annoying is you have to write down or remember the result of the first query. We really want a way to pass the result of the first query to the second query in just a single chunk of SQL syntax in one query. And the solution to that is to use a subquery. A subquery is a query that's nested inside another query. And to construct a subquery, what we do is we put the second query in brackets or round parentheses and use it in the where clause as an expression. So for instance, to construct the subquery, we put, again, the second query in brackets. Some people just call these round parentheses. I'll refer to them as both brackets and parentheses here. And you use it in the where clause as an expression. So we can say something like this. Select the columns we want, film ID, title, rental rate, from film, where the rental rate, and in the previous example, we had to say greater than 2.98 because we had already done this statement here, select average rental rate from film. With this subquery, we're able to skip that first step and actually incorporate it into our entire query here. And so notice the main syntax that allows us to do this query or this subquery is these brackets or parentheses around the subquery here. So we'll say select the columns we want from the table we want where, and then inside the where clause, here we have another subquery. Let's go ahead and code this out and code out a couple more examples. So I'm going to go see a few more examples in the SQL editor, as well as just show you the one we just went over to reiterate how we can change two queries to just one with a subquery. I'm going to go ahead and jump back to pgadmin now and open up a SQL editor. Okay, so here I am back at the SQL editor. And remember, this is what we were doing before. We had to actually run a first query and get this number, this 2.98 value. And what we're going to do now is see how we can use that subquery. So the subquery is just this. We put in parentheses or brackets here, depending what you want to call them. So we put in those parentheses, and then we say select average rental rate. Basically just put in that first query we wanted. Select average rental rate from, and in this case, it's the film table. And then make sure here that the syntax highlights it so you know it's balanced out. And then if we run this, you'll notice we get the exact same result. So I just executed that, and we got the exact same thing. Okay, so this PostgreSQL executes the query that contains a subquery in the following sequence. First, it's going to execute the subquery here. So as far as the order in which this actually gets executed by the SQL engine, it first executes the subquery, then second, it gets the result and passes it to the outer query, and then third, it executes that outer query. Okay, so a subquery can return 0 or more rows. To use this subquery, you can also use an in operator in the where clause. So let's go ahead and show you another example of using a subquery with some more complex tasks. And to start off, we're going to explore two tables just to remind ourselves of what's in them. I'm going to select all the columns from the rental table and take a quick look at it. So the rental table, and you can go ahead and set limit so you don't return everything. We're just looking for the column names here. But the rental table has a rental ID number, a rental date stamp, an inventory ID number, customer ID number, a return date, staff ID, and last update. And so a quick issue here is that I don't actually have the film ID, I only have this rental ID. And so what I want to do is match an inventory ID integer with another table, the inventory table, in order to start building up a query here. So what I want to do is get films that have been returned between two specific dates. Let's say May 29th and May 30th. So I'm going to go ahead and explore real quick the inventory table. So again, here below I have the rental table, and note I have an inventory ID on this rental table and a return date. And those are the two main columns we're going to be using from the rental table. From the inventory table, if we go ahead and check it out, let me just limit that to one row. We have an inventory ID and a film ID. And so this is the link we want. We want to link up this inventory ID from the inventory table to the inventory ID from the rental table. So let's go ahead and do that using a join. So I'm going to say this. Let me go ahead and delete that line. I'm going to go ahead and say select inventory dot film underscore ID. Basically, at the end of the day, I just want a list of film IDs. And I'm going to grab it, not from inventory, but from rental joined on inventory. And we're going to do an inner join, because I only want it where they both exist. So you can go ahead and review inner joins. We actually specifically joined rental and inventory throughout some of those examples. So go ahead and review that if this is a little fuzzy. So I'm going to say select inventory.film ID, so the film ID column from the inventory table, from rental, inner join inventory on inventory dot inventory underscore ID equal to rental dot inventory underscore ID, where, and in this case I'm going to say return date. And notice I don't have to specify what table return date is from because it's only in the rental table. So if I wanted to, I could say rental.return date, but I don't have to because return date is only in the rental table. So then I'm going to say between, and we'll say 2005, let's say May 29th, pass that in as a string. So note the dash is there, and 2005 May 30th. All right, so let's go ahead and see if this worked out for us, make sure we did everything right. Looks like it did. So we have a list of film IDs that were returned between May 29th of 2005, and May 30th of 2005. So let's go ahead and review this it's a little bit ugly of a query, but hopefully it's not too complicated. We selected the film ID column from the inventory table film ID column from the inventory table. And then we said select that specific column. So notice table.column from rental inner join inventory on inventory.inventory underscore ID and rental.inventory underscore ID. So we're joining the inventory table with the rental table on the inventory underscore ID column. And that matches up. And that's the way we can grab information based off the return date from the rental table, but hook it up to the inventory table so we can grab the film ID. So go ahead and review the inner join lecture and the between lecture if any of this is a little fuzzy or unclear. Okay, so moving along, let's go ahead and use this entire query as a subquery to get the titles of the films. So I'm going to put this entire query, delete that semicolon, and put this all in between parentheses here. And so that's my giant subquery, this list of film IDs. And those are film IDs where the return date was between 2005 May 29th and 2005 May 30th. And so then what I'm going to do is grab those film IDs and the movie title. So I'm going to say this, select the film ID, comma, title from film where the film ID is in, and then I put in the entire subquery. So basically what this is saying is return these two columns, the film ID and the title column, from the film table where the film ID is in this list. So it's going to basically treat this entire multiple rows as a list of values in this subquery. So if I go ahead and run this, let me put a semicolon there at the end, outside of the brackets or parentheses. And now I have the film ID and the title for movies that were returned between 2005 May 29th and 2005 May 30th. Okay, so I know this may look a little daunting, and usually giant subqueries are a little daunting, and this is where it gets really important to use certain naming schemes or aliasing or code formatting. So for example, some people like to put select from on one line, others like to separate it out. And this is where you're going to really discover your own style as far as how you like to space stuff out and separate it and make use of white space. But it's really critical to begin to think about organizing your SQL queries when you're using these subqueries. So these subqueries can be really powerful and get you exactly what you want, and they operate a lot quicker than doing multiple queries in a row. But just keep in mind, they can start to get a little unreadable here. So let's go ahead and review everything that we just learned. As far as the basics, a subquery is just a query within a query. So a simple example was that rental rate, where we had a subquery to return that value, and then we got that result and basically input it into the outer query. And then here, a more complicated example is getting a list of multiple rows returned, and then we use that using the in operator. Again, if you go back to the first example, that rental rate example, we just used some sort of comparison operator, or we could have used like if it was a string that was returned. But if it's just a single integer or a single string return, then you're going to use either some sort of comparison operator or an equals or a like. If your subquery is going to return a bunch of rows back to you, then you're going to use in and then that subquery that returns a bunch of rows. Okay, so I know this may be tricky, so go ahead and feel free to ask any discussion questions to clear up any questions that you have. We'll be exploring this topic of subqueries on the second assessment test. All right, so that's it. Make sure you review this lecture and play around. It's just critical that you understand how to create your subqueries and how they're useful to you. And I think that's actually really clear in the first example where we showed those two separate queries and then showed how it was easier to make it as one query. But again, feel free to post any discussion questions, and I'm happy to answer questions for you guys. Okay, well, thanks everyone, and I will see you at the next lecture.